how good this E63 Coupe is. Hey guys, welcome back to RBR, and today we're reviewing the flagship of the entry-level AMGs, the AMG CLS 53 4MATIC Plus. But before we dive into the full review, I just want to address where this car actually sits in the market, because I read a lot of reviews by professional journalists who just started off the whole thing just wrong. You see, they kept saying, gone is the CLS 63, will this inline six live up to the V8? But this car isn't built to do that. It's not meant to be a replacement to the previous CLS 63S with almost 600 brake horsepower, with a hand-built engine from a Falterbach, a V8, a bi-turbo. That's not what this car is. This car, for the UK at least, is the flagship of the entry-level family of AMGs, which sit underneath the 63s, etc. Now, a lot of you said, look, why isn't there going to be a CLS 63? I mean, it could look pretty decent. I think that's probably what it would look like. But the reason for this is clear: the GT63S. After all, someone who's either owned a CLS 63 or would consider such a car would be much better off getting the GT, because the CLS 63 would essentially just be a coupe version of the E63. Whereas we know, or we'll find out on our next review of the GT63S, I can't wait, that car is a monster in comparison to the E63 as well, which is a great car. So anyone considering a four-door coupe from AMG of the highest level would go straight to the GT. And I bet you it's those same keyboard warriors, if both cars existed, both the CLS 63 and the GT63, they'd say, well, why have you got two very similar cars and AMG are just making too many niches? So that's the reason that this generation doesn't get a CLS 63, but it does get this as the flagship of the CLS series. So instead of having the CLS 500 sit at the top of the CLS ladder, we instead get a car that's been built by AMG. So it's had its engine, gearbox, suspension, elastic kinematics, everything tweaked and tuned. So it's more of a driving performance car, more emotional. So that's better than having just a simple Mercedes-Benz with a big engine. Now this car is even more interesting because it's one of the first AMGs to bring in hybrid tech. It's a hybrid AMG. But when we say hybrid in regards to AMGs, as we discovered in the E53 review, and indeed AMG said this themselves rather, they are not interested in fuel savings, economy, and all that side of the hybrid equation. They are bringing in hybrid and electric components in order to improve driving performance. Much like the upcoming AMG ONE hypercar and the A45 S that we're so excited about, this car marries a combustion engine with electric motors and creates a rather unique flavor that we haven't seen in AMG before. The engine here is an inline six cone named M256, and it produces 429 brake horsepower with 520 Newton meters of torque. Now, normally in a petrol engine, that is where the story would end. But now we've got this EQ Boost hybrid technology. And what we have here is a car with a 48-volt system that's allowed the installation of an electric starter alternator in between the gearbox and the engine. And what that does is it provides, on demand, instantaneously, 21 brake horsepower and another boost of torque of 250 Newton meters on demand. And we'll explore how awesome that is later on the drive. The car is, of course, 4MATIC Plus, just like the E63S, but minus the drift mode. So that means it's totally variable all-wheel drive, 100% between the front and the rear, as grip is required, but generally it's more rear biased. Now let's go on to design. Having seen a lot more of the CLS on the road, I'm starting to realize that it does harken a bit more back to that original, much lauded car, just because of the simplicity of its shape, the lack of curves. You haven't got that ponton rear that the last generation car had. And it just looks quite handsome, especially in this full-on AMG spec, but maybe not as handsome in the standard cars, perhaps. Although one thing that really irks me about the design is how this car has basically got the same front end as the A-Class, especially the lights. If I compare it to the A35, you'll see what I mean. But it's weird because the new CLA, which is the A-Class's coupe, looks different. It's got its own light cluster. It looks like a different car. Whereas this CLS, in some bizarre way, is more of an A-Class coupe than the CLA is. And of course, the reason for this is that the CLS and the A-Class introduced this new Sensual Purity version of the design language to all the MB cars. So it makes sense that the newer cars would up the game a little bit. But then I hope in the facelift, or whenever that is, probably a few years from now, it'll get its own light cluster, maybe something a bit more similar to the E-Class and the S-Class families. But now let's talk about the actual 53 AMG design of the CLS. Being the flagship, it uses much of the same cues that we've seen in the past. So if we start with the front end, of course, you've got the twin bar grille as used to be in the CLS 63s. So now those old 63 grills have come onto the lower level AMGs. You've got something a bit more unique to the CLS, which are the air curtains on the front for better aerodynamics. You've of course got the matte chrome details as you see on all the other entry-level AMGs as well. This is of course the Edition 1, and you can tell that from the matte black wheels, which look absolutely awesome. These are the coolest wheels you'll find on any entry-level AMG. And I do just like the simplicity of the side of the car, the lack of lines. You just see that beautiful coupe shape. But it's the rear that I really like, which I didn't like that much in the diesel. In this 53, it just seems to work really well. You've got the little boot spoiler, which helps accentuate that part of the rear. The lights just seem to sit better because of that. Then of course you've got the lovely quad round pipes, which to me remind me of the old V8 naturally aspirated AMG exhaust pipes, and they look really good on the CLS, along with that diffuser, which will remind you of the new C63S style diffuser. As you'll see on the drive later, it looks absolutely stunning on the road, and where some of us were a little bit unsure when I reviewed that red CLS 350, I think this looks absolutely stunning. It's only overshadowed by that GT63S that we're soon to test. So a really good job here. Don't expect, however, for there to be any kind of shooting brake of this car. That's not going to happen. That's only being left for the new CLA apparently, but we'll have to see whether that surfaces as well. But now let's go inside and check out this awesome Edition 1 interior. Take a look at this interior. It is one of the nicest places to sit in the car industry at the moment. It's just so sexy. And if you've seen the E53 review, or indeed if you've seen the GT63S, quite similar to those in its execution, you've got the lovely vented lights, and there's so much in here that is just so eventful as an interior. It's exactly what you want when you're spending this kind of money. And it's why you would buy a car like this over, say, something like a C63, which, as nice as it is, cannot match as good as this car looks inside. Now, I want to show you some of the Edition 1 bits which are really quite special. Generally, I haven't liked the additions that AMG have been doing recently. I think they're a little bit too garish, but this car is an exception because, unlike the normal CLS 53, you get lovely carbon fiber here with a copper weave inside the carbon fiber. Now, I thought this would look weird, but it's really grown on me. Generally, it just looks like normal carbon, but should some bright sunlight hit it, you get the hit of that copper, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. Apart from that, you've got this idea of copper around the rest of the car, so the actual stitching on the seats is all in a kind of brown copper as well. The floor mats are lined in that same brown theme. It's subtle. I generally don't like black interiors, as you know, but just that stitching along with the dynamic is enough to make this feel quite special. Plus the CLS has got uniquely trimmed seats, which look really sporty. I really like the design, the way that you've almost got the AMG slanted lines within the seats. Of course, you benefit from that new AMG steering wheel, which looks fantastic. Unfortunately, there are none of those switches that you get in like the A35 or the newer AMGs, which is a shame because for us in the right-hand drive market, a lot of the important bits to change, like ESP off, suspension, manual mode, and dynamic select, are all on the left side of the touchpad. So when you're driving, you can't see any of them, and you kind of do this thing to get to them, which is not particularly safe. So I'm hoping facelift, you should just, I know that every car doesn't deserve to have those, but in terms of safety, it would make sense if they did have those rockers here. The other slight disappointment for me, although this system is absolutely brilliant, we reviewed the 8 Series recently, I still find this older Mercedes system more intuitive. When it came out new, I knew what to do, and it wasn't like the old Mercedes system, it was just intuitive. This is not MBUX like you get in the A-Class. It is what the E-Class has, which we've reviewed 2 years ago now. So it hasn't got that lovely voice assistant. It's got none of those new displays, etc. in here. It's still very much customizable. You do get 3 different designs in the front here, and you can customize what you want on those screens, at least on the left-hand side. But you don't get that upgraded experience that we're getting in all the new Mercedes coming out now. In fact, you don't even get it in the GT63S, but that's a moan for next week. The seating position is really nice. You sit lower than in the E-Class. The window line is higher. The windows are shorter. This is all going to sound very familiar to CLS owners. And you do really feel like you're in a coupe as opposed to sitting in another version of the E-Class. But there is one really cool screen, which is called Dynamic Data, which marries a lot of the different screens you used to have all in one. And I quite like it because it gives you not only the boost, the Newton meters, the horsepower, what mode you're in, the geometry, it also gives you, in a 4MATIC car, a clear display of where the power is going between the front and the rear. And it highlights that by highlighting either the rear or the front axle in yellow, which is really nice to see, especially if you're driving a bit more dynamically and you're trying to get some slip going, how much power is going and when the front is gripping. It's fascinating to see in this display. Not going to tread old ground on all the ambient lighting and the other features that you get in here. Do check out any of the E53, E63, etc. reviews, and you'll get a whole overview of what this car has. It's nice to see the IWC watch in there as well. For me, this is really important for AMG, so it's great to have in the flagship CLS as well. Of course, no longer is now the CLS just a 4-seater, it's now a proper 5-seater with a 3-seat rear bench. I'm 5'10" and the rear is decently spacious. I got a nice amount of headroom. It seems all fairly similar to E-Class, maybe a little bit more cramped, obviously because of the slopey roof. But these seats are really quite nice. They actually hug you a little bit. They're a bit bucket-like, much like the front seats. And the boot is very, very large, as you'd expect of a saloon car of this size. Now that's all great, but the majority of this you will see in the normal CLS as well. The rise and failure of this car will be on how emotional it is to drive. So let's go and explore that right now. So guys, the most important thing for an AMG owner is how we connect to the cars on an emotional level. And the first stage of that is the first thing you experience in the car, which is the startup. Now I'd heard a lot about the 53 engines, how they don't have a good startup and they're very quiet. And I kind of fell into that trap of that assumption even in the E53 review. But having driven the A35, I discovered that that isn't quite true. So if you go into, the problem is all these cars default on comfort mode whenever you turn the car off and jump back in, even a few seconds later. So it always starts in comfort, and comfort is quiet. But if you put the car into Sport Plus as a prerequisite, turn the car on and hold the upshift paddle, you actually get a few little pops and bangs at the end of it. And that's a trick that they've started in the A35 to give owners a bit of a more interesting startup. So owners of 53s, try that in your cars. You'll get a bit more of a fruity, more AMG-like startup. Now let's get going and see how this sounds as you begin to drive and pick up pace. I've left the car in Sport Plus because that's where the car sounds the best. So let's try and see what this soundtrack is like. I think there's a certain sound now to all of the entry-level AMGs, whether it's a V6 like in the C43, a 4-pot in the A35, or this inline-6 hybrid. They all seem to sing a similar kind of tune, and we're getting more and more used to it now. So this one, again, it's reminding me quite a bit of the A35. And the way that the shift sounds when they upshift, even the little overruns you get when you let off the throttle. Listen to that. So the exhaust is in the background, and it seems to play a similar kind of tune in terms of the way that the sound plays as you kind of have in the 63 AMGs. But it's much more sedate and it's quieter. So if you want more sound, then you should be getting the flagships. And there should of course be a big difference between the entry levels on sound and the flagship AMGs. Now let's see what it's like when you're kind of working your way through the gears. that sounds decent. I think it sounds louder than what we had in that E53 review. Do you guys remember? It's a bit more like the A35, I think, which is good because I thought that was the best sounding entry level. Woohoo! It's got a bit of that E63 build up in the revs. I think some of that is artificial, being pumped from the engine bay kind of into the interior. But it's familiar sounding if you've driven the E63. You're going to get some pretty decent AMG sound, which is such a requirement for us. We need to have that emotional connection. Just impressive performance figures aren't enough to satiate the AMG customer. Now I want to get onto the drivetrain because there's something quite special happening here. And what it is, it's the marriage between the combustion engine, the hybrid EQ boost technology, and AMG's 4MATIC Plus variable all-wheel drive. Those three things coming together is producing something quite special, and you feel it almost every time you begin to set off. So if I stop now, immediately when you set off, you get an immediate kick of power. And that's not coming from the car's large single twin scroll turbo. That immediate kick of power and boost actually comes from the EQ side of it, the hybrid technology. So what's happening at that moment is that EQ boost starter alternator between the engine and the gearbox gives us access to 21 brake horsepower and 250 additional Newton meters of torque immediately as you set off. And the effect of that is having almost like a EV car, like immediate access to power. And it's brilliant because by the time you get that power, the traditional gas turbocharger is spooled up and provides the rest to you. The effect of it is you're having no lag. And if anything, the car feels a little bit more like the E63. The effect of it is when you shoot off or you want to take an opportunity to drive faster or overtake, it feels like you're driving a much more powerful car. And it's so amazing. Every time I drive a 53, I'm thinking to myself, what is this technology going to be like in the A45 S? Or should AMG ever marry it to their V8 63 cars? It could be absolutely mind-blowing, this marriage between immediate electric power and a powerful combustion engine. You see how exciting it's made just a simple 6-pot like this car. The next emotional connection that AMG owners have with their cars, certainly in modern AMGs, and I stress in modern ones, is handling and chassis. So we've been spoilt by cars like the C63S and the AMG GT family, and we want our cars to handle better. So I'm really, really pleased to say that this CLS 53 is the best handling of the big entry-level AMGs. It's just got such a way of shrinking around you that it ends up feeling more C-Class than E-Class. It's got a wonderful balance that reminds me of the old CLS 63 5.5 litre, the way that car just had a really sweet balance to it. And the steering is brilliant. It's speed-sensitive steering, and unlike what we tested recently in the 8 Series and the M5, it's speed-sensitive steering that's really good. The way the steering becomes heavier as you pick up speed, but it's lighter in slower maneuvers. And just the feedback you get the feedback exactly when the car is turning, not later. Because getting it later, as we said in the 8 Series review, is just killer for your confidence when you're driving a car or trying to drive a car faster. The steering on this is really, really good. It's really what makes the car stand out, not just when you're driving fast, but in daily driving. A lot of this is thanks to the extra negative camber that they put both on the front and the multi-link rear axle. And of course, we've got AMG specific elastokinematics as well. So it's all been done to increase rigidity and make this car as stable as possible when you're driving faster through the corners. Now I want to talk about the daily aspect of this car. I've been driving this car pretty much in Sport Plus all the time. And that is a testament to how good the air suspension is in this car, because you guys will remember the last time I said that I drive an AMG in Sport Plus all the time was the G-Wagon, because it had enough softness in the suspension for you to be able to get away with that. Compared to the diesel CLS that we tried last year, which was on steels, this is so much more comfortable, even in pure AMG form, even in Sport Plus. But now if I chuck the car back into comfort, all the sound dies, the suspension becomes even more comfortable, and then you start to see the link of this car to the S-Class. And speaking of the S-Class, if you get the driving assistance package, you get all of the upgrades that the S-Class has in the CLS. So if you indicate, the car will change lane itself. If you're approaching a junction or a turn, the car will slow down itself in anticipation. If you're in standstill traffic, it'll keep moving, having stopped. So it gets all those benefits of the S-Class in this. It's pretty much a proper digital chauffeur when it comes to self-driving. In addition to that, having now a 5-seat rear bench in the CLS is a game changer. Please don't buy the E53 Saloon. There is no reason to. Get the CLS 53. It is by far the pick of the bunch. So for us in the UK, this is the flagship of the entry-level AMGs. As we said, we're not getting the GT43 or the 53. And in that way, it really does hit the nail on the head. It's got that soundtrack that you're familiar with as much vocal pleasure as you get out of the A35, but it's really got steering and handling that sets itself apart from the rest of the cars. Pair all of that with the 9-speed gearbox you get in modern AMGs, and it's such an addictive package. It's an exciting car to drive daily, and it almost fools you into thinking that it's similar to the 63 AMGs thanks to the engine response. Now, I feel the CLS 53 is a small part of a future that's currently in development, a future of EQ-powered monster AMGs. Yes, the future is scary, but if this car is any indication, then I'm equal parts intrigued as I am frightened. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that full review of this new CLS 53 entry-level flagship. Please do like and subscribe as you always do, and I'm going to have some more fun as usual. See you next time.